I've read a lot on this subreddit and enjoyed many of its posts, so I thought I should contribute. This isn't anything nearly as crazy as some of the stuff I've read on here before, but I thought that I ought to give back a little to the community. It was the summer right after I graduated from high school. A good friend and I decided we'd try our hand at camping. We grew up in the greater Los Angeles area, so our knowledge of the great outdoors was nothing beyond the couple of years we had had in Cub Scouts of America, all the way back when we were in elementary school. In other words, we had no idea what we were doing. We packed a tent, a couple of bags, supplies, and headed off in his car. Note well that I grew up in the 80s, so this time was before the wide prevalence of cell phones and the existence of other portable digital devices. We drove north on the 395 for about 6 hours, then headed westward into the mountains of the area of Inyo Canyon. Our first mistake: we didn't pre-plan which place to camp. We played it by ear like fools. The second mistake: we didn't leave until mid-afternoon. It was pitch black darkness when we finally arrived in the general area. We had driven off the main road and onto a dirt road in order to find a nice spot to camp. The dust from driving through the dirt overwhelmed the headlight high beams when we finally decided to pull over and set up camp. It was around 23:30 around this time, and we were exhausted and famished. Any place was a good spot to camp for us, given our only reason to do so at this point was our hunger and exhaustion. Third mistake: we didn't bring flashlights either. We only had BIC lighters for our cigarettes. We tried to set up the tent using our lighters and the headlights of the car, which was parked about 10 to 15 feet away. The wind was blowing fiercely though, so the lighters constantly sputtered out after only a few seconds, either directly because of the wind or indirectly because the wind would push the flame into our thumbs. Clearly we were being complete idiots. We finished setting up the tent though eventually, but at that point I was too tired to even eat. My friend managed to make some instant ramen though. We smoked a cigarette in the car, then crashed out in the tent. We awoke to a very cold morning. It must have been around 5:30, and immediately upon exiting the tent, we realized that we were cramped at the entrance of a hiking trail. There were at least 2 no camping signs within visible distance from us. We dismantled the tent quickly, cleaned up, and cleared out. That morning, we ended up buying some cheap flashlights and a hot meal in a very small town nearby. It wasn't really a town, more like a few storefronts and shops on a main road, only about the length of an average city block. We went into some office, though I don't recall exactly what it was. It might have been a park ranger station or the office headquarters for a campground. In any case, we found and reserved a good site for the night this time. The campground was basically a large circle with campsites along its outer circumference, with each campsite being about 50 yards from its neighbor. In the middle of the circle was a common bathroom and shower. We circled around it once, and I think we saw one family that was all set up with a tent and camper. We found our spot and set up camp, which was quite far away from them. That night was when we had a creepy encounter. My friend and I were laying in the tent, shining our flashlights upward and just chatting away. Our new flashlights eventually gave out though. Yes, broken. Our fire pit was about 6 feet from the opening of our tent, and it was just a glowing ember at this point. We probably should have completely put it out, and we probably also shouldn't have had the tent so close. In any case though, there we were in the dark, chatting away and having a good time. My friend began to be distracted with his foot. After the 3rd or 4th time, he got up to check what was happening. I asked him what was wrong. He told me that something was tapping his foot from outside the tent. His foot was leaning up against the side, so from the outside you would have been able to see a bulge in the tent's side where his foot was. It was as if pebbles were being thrown at his foot through the tent. There it is again. What the hell? Each time it happened, there would be a sound like pebbles or a light tap. We sort of laughed it off, assuming it was a twig or grass moving in the wind, and perhaps a loose strap on the outside of the tent. I don't recall exactly how it happened at first. I don't recall exactly how it happened at first, but I do remember we suddenly became silent at the same time. A sound became audible to the both of us. Footsteps, slowly moving towards our tent. We wondered if it was a bear or other non-human animal, but it seemed distinctly bipedal. They were very slow and measured, a step about every 2 seconds. I finally said in a whisper, "Someone's coming." My friend didn't move. His face had an expression of fear. At some point, my friend bolted up and just said, "Fuck this." He grabbed his pipe, stuffed it full of pot, and took the biggest, deepest drags I've ever seen a person take. About a minute or two later, he was all out. And drugs aren't my thing, so I was alone in the tent as far as conscious bodies were concerned. I was sitting up alert at this point, and I had taken out the only weapon I had, a Swiss Army pocket knife. I took out the big and small blades, as well as the ice pick in the middle, and held it like some ridiculous combo melee weapon. I could see the glowing embers in the fire pit through the sheer nylon material of our tent, and I was able to roughly but barely discern some of the rocks around it. I watched and listened intently. The footsteps came closer, and at the same slow pace. With each step, I could hear the dirt and rocks underfoot crunching and grinding. At some point, it was clear to me that whoever it was standing between the tent and the fire pit. For my fuzzy line of sight to the burning embers through the nylon became obscured by something outside the tent. The footsteps stopped right in front of us, about 6 to 8 inches, no more than a foot from the entrance of the tent. I was silent for about 1 minute, when I suddenly heard a click. At exactly the same time, I clearly saw through the nylon tent wall a flashlight turn on. I was able to not just see the flashlight, but also the outline of the hand holding it. The light was shining on the zipper entrance into the tent, just inches away. Blood drained out of my head, and my palms instantly became dripped in sweat. I yelled out, "Who's there?" There was some fear in my voice, but it was mostly aggressive in tone. Whoever it was, the person immediately turned off their flashlight. I didn't move, and neither did they. They stood outside the entrance, gazing down on us. My friend is out, totally unaware of what's going on. Nevertheless, I pretended he was still awake, and whispered just loud enough to be audible to our visitor. "Yes, it's loaded. There's one in the chamber," as if my friend was awake and had asked me about a gun. Our fourth mistake. We didn't have a gun, or any real weapon for self-defense. It felt like an eternity, but after sitting still for at least 10 minutes, I finally slowly heard the feet turning in the dirt, then walking away from the tent steadily. I stayed up the whole night, and it wasn't until the light of dawn came through the tent that I finally crashed out. The heat inside the tent woke us up, and it was near noon by this point. We went outside to inspect the site, but found nothing missing. However, we did find boot prints leading away from our campsite, and outside the campground itself. That was the last time I ever camped in a tent. About a year ago, I was working on my design portfolio and needed some art supplies. Mainly some clay for a project I had been working on for about 2 months, and a bunch of markers as well. It was sometime in the week I decided to head to my favorite arts and supply store, which is located in a warehouse area of town. There's basically no residential areas, just a lot of warehouses and other large-scale industrial buildings. And normally I would take my car and ride to the store and back, as I never really liked walking in that area, and I always felt uneasy in the dark of German winters. That day, however, my girlfriend had taken the car to another town for an internship, so I was forced to take the train. When I left my flat, I walked the 5 minutes it takes to the train station, whilst listening in to some music. The train station was very crowded, and I waited on the bench for the train to arrive. As German trains tend to do, it was very late. When I got to my stop, it was almost dark out, and I was dreading walking to the art store alone. Luckily, the walk to the store was fine. I was walking alone with no light, but my phone was on, and I had some music to keep me company. It was only a 10-minute walk as well. When I arrived at the store, I picked up my 12 pounds of clay, a bunch of markers, as well as some spray cans. By the time I had left the store after gathering up all my things, it was completely dark out. The area had barely any streetlights since it was so industrial, and I started to feel uneasy. With 12 pounds of clay holding me down, I couldn't really be that fast. After about 4 minutes or so of walking, my phone died as well. I stopped to check if it was really dead or just bugging out. I was angry at myself for having forgotten to charge it before leaving home. Whilst standing there gawking at my phone, someone walked by me very quickly. I didn't get a good look at the man, but he seemed very erratic. His movement reminded me of someone high on drugs. After about 5 seconds, he took a sudden turn and was gone from sight. I figured he was just on his way to his own place, and picked up my bag and started to go on my way as well. About a minute or two later, though, the same man returned from around the corner and began to walk towards me once again. Since there was only one walkway, I couldn't change sides or walk away from him. In my mind, he just bought some drugs or sold some, and I didn't really want to know his business. This time, though, as he passed me by, he stared at me with this deranged, psychotic look in his eyes. This time I got scared. Not only was he taller than me, but he was also way more muscular than me. After taking another 10 to 20 steps, I looked back to check where he was. I hoped that he was walking further down the road, but when I looked back, he was barely 10 meters away from me and walking very quickly towards me. I had only had about 100 more meters until I was at the train station. In all honesty, I should have just dropped the clay and ran, but I didn't think about it in the moment, and I ran with the 12 pounds of clay in my hand. As I started running, I could hear his footsteps running after me. I reached the train station steps and flew up them like I never had before, feeling like he was right on my heels still. At the top of the stairs were a crowd of people, and once I reached the top, I felt safe enough to look down the stairs. But as I looked, he was nowhere to be seen. I took the next train home and never saw him again after that. I don't know what his intentions were, and honestly, I don't even want to know. I ran a bunch of errands yesterday. The final one entailed going to a specific company's office. Unfortunately, there were only 2 in my area, and I couldn't have made it to the office across town that I prefer before they closed, which left me with the one in the ghetto. It was still broad daylight out, and I parked right up against the busy major road in the otherwise empty parking lot. I assumed nobody would try anything. Wrong. I get into my car, roll my window down, and as I'm texting my boyfriend to confirm I've finished the errand, a woman appears at my window suddenly. She was very obviously on drugs, and at first she was just giving me the typical beggar spiel. I'm homeless, I need money. All I had on me was a card, but I still had half a salad left from lunch, so I offered that to her. She seemed to be contented with that for a moment, but then continued to ramble on about how she was in labor, when she clearly was not even pregnant, by the way. Her husband can't come to the hospital because it's against his religion, and she needs a C-section immediately. She then suddenly leans in my window so that her face is right next to mine and says, "I'm having this baby right now, and if you don't help me, I'm gonna kill you right here," while shaking a hand inside her hoodie pouch, insinuating to me that she had a weapon held inside. At this point, I'm fairly certain if I was to grab the car keys and start trying to drive off without her, she was going to legitimately stab me, or do something like jump into my car and get seriously injured falling off when I got out onto the highway. I played along. I promised her I'd take her to the hospital, and waited until she hopped into my car. As I started heading towards the hospital, intentionally squealing tires away from green lights, going 15 over the limit, and driving as shittily but safely as possible in the hopes of a cop pulling me over to save me from this hell, she remained perfectly still, with her hand in her hoodie pouch, rambling on about things like she's been pregnant since 2017, her husband will murder her for having this baby, she's going to shoot me if it doesn't survive. Suddenly, she erupts into this god-awful screech. She just starts kicking at my dash and demands to know why I'm going the way I am, because Taco Bell is the other way. I thought you wanted me to go to the hospital to have the baby with you. She tells me no, the baby needs food, and if it starves, she's going to shoot me and watch me bleed out. At this point, I'm not sure if she was bluffing or if she was actually serious about the death threats, since I couldn't physically see the weapon. But regardless, I wanted to get as far away from her as possible. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and told her I was going to go get her a soda and food for the baby. Luckily, somehow she agreed to that, so I locked her in the car, hid behind a pillar at the front of the store, and called police immediately. They managed to get her out of the car and calmed her down enough to where she'd sit still enough to be questioned for a while. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were very patient with her, even as she was trying to kick at their legs and scratch them. I could even hear her screeching occasionally. Eventually, one approached me for my statement. He told me I'd done the right thing by not upsetting her, and thanked me for calling for help instead of escalating the situation. He escorted me back to my car after making sure I was physically and mentally okay to drive, and as I was heading down the highway towards my house, a bunch of ambulances suddenly started tearing down the road towards the grocery store I'd parked at. I haven't seen anything on the news, and I haven't received any calls from the PD yet, but I hope everything turned out okay, and that she didn't hurt herself or anyone else. So, if you're still out there, lady, I hope you get the help you need, but truly, I don't ever want to see you again. A couple of years ago, I flew home to visit family. I'd be there about a week, then we'd head to the coast for a week, then go back home for another. I really needed this break. I just ended an on-again, off-again relationship. Like seriously, on one day, then off the very next. It took 7 months of putting up with it in the end. Because you're supposed to fight for what's important to you, right? Anyhow, I finally just said it was done. No more chances, no trying to work it out. Just done. With that chapter of my life being over, I was more than happy to be somewhere else, surrounded by family, and begin putting myself back together. Got there, spent a couple of days sleeping quite a lot. My mother's a nurse, and she was becoming concerned that there was something physically wrong with me. I just needed a couple of days in a safe place, where I could let my brain work on digesting the new life I'd had when I got back home. So, before we left for the coast, I met up with a friend from grade school that I'd kept in contact with over the years. I thought it would just be he and I, but it didn't really faze me that another person showed up. We hung out for a while, and then I needed to head home because I had to take a backwoods rural route to get back, or take a different route that would add another 20 miles onto my trek. Being backwoods, I needed to be able to keep an eye out for stray deer, so I said goodbye and told S.A. that if he was ever in my neck of the woods, look me up and we'd grab a drink or hang out together. I told him to grab my number from my friend, and out the door I went. About halfway home, though, I got this weird queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, so I slowed way down, and sure enough, there was a deer in the middle of the road. Because I had slowed down so much, I could see another car out on the road. I couldn't shake the queasy feeling, so I figured it would be better to cut off and go down the main road, because there were more places to stop just in case. I seriously didn't want to stop in some random rural farmer's driveway. I've watched far too many movies to ever make that mistake. So I get over to the main road and pull into a gas station, and sit there for a few minutes, trying not to get sick to my stomach. I ran into the store, grabbed some water and ginger ale, and came back out to my vehicle, but I still couldn't shake that feeling. I started to head home from the gas station, and knew I didn't want to go straight home, so I drove around, taking this road or that, until finally the weird feeling went away. Then I went home and read for a bit, fell asleep right after. The next day, everything was perfectly fine, and we headed off to the coast. Fast forward 2 weeks. The trip is over, and I'm still feeling a little fragile over the breakup, but that's about all. I figured I would begin the process of cleansing the environment of negative energies, and then work through the baggage that came with the breakup. I knew there was a lot, and it would take quite some time. So, the next day, I'm going about my business, and everything as cool as can be, when picking through the junk left behind after a breakup at least. I'm really just doing mindless things to zone out, and not have to think too much on the activity, since my brain was already working full-time anyway. A little bit later in the day though, my phone suddenly rings. I don't get a lot of calls, so I assume there might be a family emergency, and that I would need to answer ASAP. The area code of the caller, who was not in my contacts, is the same as my cousin, so I answered without a second thought. On the other end though was S.A., the acquaintance I'd met at my friend's house. It was a little weird for him to be calling me, but I wasn't thinking that anything was terribly out of the ordinary. I asked him what was up, and he said he was at the airport. I found it a little bit odd, but I said, "Oh, that's cool, I guess. Where are you going?" He said that he'd already landed. Again, I was distracted, and really just wanted to get him off the phone so I could go back to my mental sidestep and zone out while my brain chugged away. I said that I hoped he had a good time wherever he was, but suddenly he said that he needed me to come pick him up. Wait, what? Did you just say you needed me to come pick you up? Yeah, I came to visit you. Pause there for a second. I know for a fact I didn't show any more interest in him than general courtesy. Even the tossed over the shoulder look me up comment was just one of those polite things to say because you never actually plan on seeing them ever again. Why did you come to visit me? I asked. I felt a deep connection. I wanted to be with you. I was starting to get angry, as well as a bit freaked out at this stage. I told him I felt no such connection at all, and couldn't believe he would fly all the way across the country just to see someone he'd spend about 2 hours with. He countered, "You invited me when you said to look me up." No, that's just the polite thing to say to some random person that's taken a very small impression on me. He got mad and said he needed to find a way back home since I'd misled him. Misled him? What the fuck? Look me up if you're ever in my neck of the woods. It somehow led him to think that was a basis for a sort of encounter that was meaningful. He told me he needed a place to stay until he could get the money for a plane ticket back. I told him that there were more than enough hotels that he could stay at while he got himself sorted out. He said he didn't have any money after buying the random one-way plane ticket. At this stage, I was flabbergasted, angry, and freaked out that someone would do that on a one-way ticket. Finally, though, I caved. I said he could stay 1 night while he sorted shit out, but I expected him to be gone no later than the morning of the day after tomorrow. I bring him back to my place, throw pillows and a blanket on the couch, and turn to head to my bedroom. He asks if he can sleep with me. No. Actually, no fucking way that's gonna happen. I point out that I have firearms, and I warn him not to come in. The next day, I have to work, so I woke him up and told him to get up and find a way home immediately. I also told him I had work, but would check on his progress because the next morning, I was dropping him off for departures, regardless of whether he had a way back or not. At work, he blew my phone up all day, kept pestering me to come back for lunch and other sorts of things. I told him no. I was way too busy, of course. I finally get home from work, and I'm chuckling at a text I got about my dog. And that's when I noticed he had rearranged everything, and by everything, I mean every room of the house had been changed. I flipped my lid. I asked him why in the hell he thought it was normal to do anything that he did. Instead of answering, he got mad. He asked who I'd been talking to. It really wasn't any of his business, but I'd received a text from the guy watching my dog while I was on vacation. Color me shocked when he said he didn't want me to talk to the guy. I was no longer freaked. A full-force apocalyptic disaster was about to be unleashed and leave nothing behind but a smoking crater. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees, and I very calmly said to get his shit. I was calling a cab to take him to the airport because he was clearly crazy. Side note, full rage has been achieved when it feels like the temperature drops, and I speak very calmly. If I'm complaining about something, it's a quick burn. If I go monotone calm and tilt my head to one side slightly, that's Arctic levels of anger. He, unaware of the environmental change that had occurred and the chances of his survival dropping by the second, decided to tell me he'd hacked my computer and got my ex's phone number. They both agreed that I was a heartless bitch. We were fast approaching the epic scale disaster, and he finally seemed to notice how deep into rage I had sunk. I told him it was unlikely he'd gotten into my computer, because it was locked with a full quote from The Art of War by Sun Tzu. He would have had to have the processing power of the Hadron Collider to break it, and it was obvious that was not the case. I told him he had 3 minutes to get his stuff and get out, or I couldn't be responsible for what would occur. He continued yelling insults at me, gathered his stuff, and left. After that, I used to get lots of calls and texts from him. I'd block one, then 6 more would pop up. It happened all the time, but eventually it just stopped altogether. And to this day, I have no idea, nor any interest in knowing where he's at, or if he ever made it back.